What makes a giant sequoia so capable and so potent in the carbon capture story, essentially, and why it's such a fantastic ally in the fight against climate change is that they behave differently to other trees. The reason that they get 30 feet wide and 250 feet tall and live for 2,500 plus years is that they have this genetic anomaly where they actually never stop growing. Trees are like people. You plant them, they're young, they grow, they hit maturity, and then eventually they die. Sequoias are different. Sequoias never stop growing. So the story of the giant sequoia is that 95% of them have been cut down in their native habitat over the last 150 years. It's been a tragic story where we've seen their numbers hugely reduced by logging, and now we're seeing the impact of climate change on those few that are remaining. So we have drought, wildfire, bark beetle, all attacking those that are left. You might have heard about the wildfires that are taking hold in California at the moment. We're hearing about the loss of giant sequoias, the old growth sequoias that have been around for 1, 2, 3,000 years. And their numbers now are about 70,000 left, which is in tree terms, not a big number. Climate change is responsible for droughts in California, particularly around the sequoias in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The droughts put stress on the trees. That creates a drier habitat, and quite often there's a buildup of forest debris on the floor because actually in this case, or in a lot of cases, humans have prevented natural wildfires, which are actually part of the sequoia's natural life cycle. That means that we've got more debris on the floor, we've got drier forests and hotter temperatures, and that creates what we call superheated wildfires. Now, a sequoia tree actually has a natural red bark that everyone's familiar with, the redwoods, and that has a natural fire retardant characteristic. And so in the normal cycle of life in a sequoia forest, wildfires will come through, but they won't be hot enough to actually damage the trees. But in the case of these superheated wildfires, which are contributed by drought and higher temperature, this red bark, which can be as thick as 3 foot on the older trees, can't withstand the heat, and the fire actually gets up to the crown of these old trees, and unfortunately, once the crown goes, they die. Our mission is to plant 100,000 in the UK. We don't have wildfires, we don't have bark beetle infestations in the same way, we don't have drought, particularly not in Wales where we are today, and that's then giving them essentially like a life raft for the species to thrive here and have the opportunity to create new forests of the future. How I came to this project was I was thinking about planting some trees for my 2 children, and I came across an article that talked about General Sherman, the biggest giant sequoia on the planet. It talked about the volume of the tree and how much carbon it had stored, and the answer was over 1,400 tons of carbon dioxide had been stored in this one tree. And I thought, how does that compare to the lifetime of your average Brit and their footprint? And that came out at about 500 tons over a lifetime. I thought, crikey, one of these trees has done more carbon capture than the lifetime emissions of almost 3 average UK people. Now, trees are like people. You plant them, they're young, they grow, they hit maturity, the rate of growth comes off, and then eventually they die. Sequoias are different. Sequoias never stop growing throughout their entire lifetime. They actually layer on approximately the same amount of mass each year as they did the previous year, and that just keeps going and going, which is why the fastest growing trees in the world in terms of amount of wood created every year is actually giant sequoias. They will layer on more wood in a single year than an equivalent different conifer species will do in its entire lifetime. The older they get, the more capable they are at sucking in more carbon dioxide and creating wood, which is really what we need from trees. But it is that genetic anomaly that sets them aside from others. It's also what allows them to live for so long, because they never stop growing up. They never stop getting bigger. From a sort of carbon stacking point of view, their contribution just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is why old growth forests are so critical. Like, it's the oldest sequoias that are doing the most work on this planet right now. to sort out carbon emissions. And so creating new older growth forests over time is actually what's important here if we want to continue to use nature to address the issues around climate change. We're thinking about climate change as this big human threat, to the planet and ourselves. We need an industrial scale solution to what is an industrial scale problem. And giant sequoia trees, in terms of carbon stacking per hectare or acre, are incredibly efficient. So you will see a sequoia forest per hectare or per acre capturing over 10 times more carbon than a native woodland would in the same amount of space. They are incredibly capable of capturing and stacking carbon. They're the fastest growing conifer in the right conditions on the planet, and they can live for 3,000 years in some cases. So if you bring those characteristics together, you have a tree that, from the perspective of climate change, is an incredible ally. And so we're buying up these pieces of land where they've got felled timber plantations. We're planting these giant sequoias to grow as fast as they possibly can and store as much carbon as possible. We propel the project by getting supporters who want to do some carbon offsetting, but also want to support a project that is planting an endangered species. And so our sort of day-to-day is, can we find people who want to support the project, and then can we go and plant the trees across various locations? By only planting on previously felled conifer plantations, which were monocultures in most cases, we're starting, our baseline is 0 biodiversity, and it's a conifer plantation monoculture. So that's where it started. And were we not to buy the land, that's what it would become again for timber harvesting. By planting giant sequoia trees and then intermixing them with native trees, we plant 3 natives for every giant sequoia we plant. We use trees like Scots pine, which is a native conifer as well. And then nurse crop trees to protect the sequoias and natives from frost and wind. We are dramatically improving the biodiversity of our sites. So that's how we think about the site selection and how we deal with making sure that we're never displacing interesting ecologies and site biology. These trees are completely non-invasive. They do not propagate when planted naturally. So if we plant 2,000 giant sequoias on a hillside in Wales here, they're not going to start popping up in other locations locally, displacing other native trees. They will just stay where they've been planted. And so they're completely non-invasive. They're like sleeping giants. Because we don't have wildfires here, and it's the wildfires that are required to open up the seed cones in order to then spread the seeds that can then propagate new trees. We don't have those, so they don't propagate naturally here. So our mission is to plant 100,000 in the UK. We know that they thrive here because they were originally brought over by the Victorians around the 1850s. They've grown fabulously. We've got some specimens here in this wood that we're here surrounded by to demonstrate that. It's about creating the old growth sequoia forests of the future, in the case that they don't survive in their natural habitat. And actually some of the greatest moments of this whole project have been when you have a family coming and they're planting a tree as a present for their baby, and the baby's there sort of given a small part of soil helping plant it, or a grandparent, for example, and it's a legacy thing. And for them it's meaningful to know that they're putting something into the ground today that will survive as far into the future as the Roman Empire was in the past. I mean, it's a sort of intellectually quite astounding thing to be a part of. Every day it's just very apparent. To be a part of it is wonderful. You're smiling as we're talking now because you can see it. In my lifetime, I will be able to come back and see the forests that I've planted at a very early stage in their life, but they'll be big trees. I think that's purposeful. I think that has meaning. I mean, even just coming here this weekend and seeing the ones that are 8 foot tall that we planted 2 years ago is a fantastic feeling.